Late one February night in 1968, an editor's attempts to sleep was just an exercise in futility. He had a task to complete and very little time in which to do it. A new sound had emerged out of rock steady, one that was so different that from the sweltering heat of Kingston to the rain-drenched tracks of Portland, people had their ears glued to their radios. At dawn, February 14th, 1968, sleep finally came in the form of a trance, during which the editor was led to his Bible and Revelations, chapter 14, verses 2 to 3. And I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. And from the vision the editor awoke with these words etched in his mind: "This is music fit for a king, from which a king will rise. Therefore, let this sound be called reggae, from the Latin word regius, meaning fit for a king." He called 3 of his colleagues, whose numbers were all busy, strange as it may seem. They were all trying to call each other to share the extraordinary vision they had all revealed that dawn. With a feverish energy that was inexplicable, the editor went to his office and wrote an article which prophesied that this sound would catapult Jamaica into the minds, imagination, and the attention of the entire world. On the evening of February 14th, 1968, the Daily Gleaner's Swing magazine became the first to use the word reggae in print. The new sound had a name, and Swing's editor, John Golding, could finally sleep. Reading from 1996 issue of Dub Missive magazine out of Florida. I've been going through some of my old periodicals recently. Got me in the mind to do an explanation of roots, reggae, rastafari, how it's all related, all interconnected. I don't know if this story is true or not. There's, as with many things in reggae, there's a lot of different interpretations of how things originated. One theory is that the word reggae came from streggae, which was street slang for a prostitute. Somewhere between that very street interpretation and that very spiritual theory, probably somewhere in between is the truth. John Golding was the editor of Reggae Swing magazine, very influential in reggae in Kingston, gave Muta Baruka, the dub poet, one of his early breaks. He was a member of the 12 Tribes of Israel organization of Rastafari, as was Bob Marley, and later repatriated to Ethiopia, last I heard. Dub Missive magazine brought me in mind of the origins of reggae, how it's related to Rastafari. What is Rastafari? What is roots? Basically, it all goes back to 1930 and the coronation of Rastafari Makonnen, as he was named, as Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia, as celebrated in the 1930 issue of National Geographic magazine. Color portraits. Haile Selassie, Empress Menen, crowned Emperor of Ethiopia, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, claims to be 225th ruler in direct succession from King Solomon of the Bible and the Queen of Sheba. Some more of these portraits of the time. Ethiopian royalty. Very in-depth article taking up a good portion of this National Geographic issue. What made this significant is that Haile Selassie's accession to the throne was seen as fulfillment of a certain degree of prophecy hinted at in certain passages of the Bible. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a strong political movement of black consciousness, black political awareness, striving to develop a more positive black identity in the wake of slavery and its final abolition in the 1800s in America. One of the leaders out of Jamaica who caused a huge splash internationally was a man named Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Followers of reggae will know that name very well. He's been celebrated in many different reggae songs, particularly in the work of Burning Spear. Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican who started out as a labor organizer, later relocated to Harlem, New York, and founded what was called the United Negro Improvement Association, something of a black movement for self-determination, both economic, political, social. To this end, he established chapters in many different countries, had thousands of people under the UNIA banner, and in the 1920s founded the Black Star Line, which was a fleet of ships to carry blacks from the New World back to Africa to new lives. And to that end, he purchased 4 ships. Unfortunately, he was seen as a threat by the authorities, was swiftly discredited, charged with financial irregularities, and spent the rest of his days largely in exile. His opinions and philosophies would form much of reggae later on. Philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, seen now as a national hero of Jamaica, but ended his life somewhat in disgrace, barely remembered. In 1940 he passed away, I believe. One of the members of Marcus Garvey's UNIA was a man named Leonard Howell, who had spent several years living abroad. Now, during Marcus Garvey's leadership of the UNIA, Haile Selassie did come to power, and Marcus Garvey was attributed with a prophecy of look to the east for the coming of a black king. Haile Selassie's accession to the throne was seen as fulfillment of that prophecy, though it's unclear whether Marcus Garvey ever actually uttered those words, but they have certainly been attributed to him over the years. So that was seen as a fulfillment of prophecy, and also of prophecies hinted at in the Bible of a new king arising, and to deliver the black race out of bondage and into freedom. So Leonard Howell, follower of Marcus Garvey, returned to Jamaica. He's been called the first Rastafarian. Along with several other leaders, he began organizing the early followers of the Rastafari movement in the 1930s and 1940s. Around 1940, he established a community that was called Pinnacle, which was basically a communal settlement of Rastas, had reportedly over 1,000 followers there alone, and various other camps over the island of Jamaica. Huge, seen as an enormous threat to the authorities, as the Rastafarians wanted nothing to do with any sort of class structure, economic structure. The Rastafari movement had always had a kind of a fluid sense of philosophy, no set dogmas as organized religions did. By the 1950s, reportedly the wearing of dreadlocks came into fashion, somewhat inspired by the Mau Mau rebels of Africa. It's a strong thread of resistance against authority in Jamaica, going back to the Maroons, who were slaves that rebelled and led guerrilla battles against the British authorities throughout the centuries of slavery, and still exist today, the Maroons. So the early Rastafarians came under increasing police harassment, persecution. Of course, their consumption of ganja was a convenient excuse for attacks. They were widely demonized by the public, considered thieves, killers, what have you. Became even more intimidating with the wearing of dreadlocks. They became an easy target as well, but the wearing of dreadlocks was basically a pointed statement to what the Rastas called Babylon, basically the authorities, the economic system, particularly the British colonial system, and the papal church or organized religion in general. Leonard Howell was spent 2 years, declared insane, incarcerated at various times. Attracted much police attention. Pinnacle was raided many times. Finally, basically completely destroyed by the mid-1950s, during which his followers dispersed, many settling into the Kingston ghettos like Bacawal, and they're interacting with various other groups. One of these groups was called the Buru Men, who had a drumming tradition directly preserved from West Africa, brought over by the slaves. The Buru Men interacted with the early Rastas, passed on some of their drumming techniques, particularly the 3-drum bass, funde, and repeater drum patterns. Also, the Kumina drumming would prove an influence on Rasta drumming. Rasta drummers like Count Ossie and his troupe would hold Nyabingi sessions, which were long, night-long, free-flowing reasoning and philosophical discussions punctuated by music on the drums, chanting, or orations, poems. But the Rastas largely dispersed into the inner cities of Kingston, still widely demonized by the populace, who were fearful of their nature. They were called Blackheart men. If you know the Bunny Wailer album, Blackheart Man, that is in reference to the Rastafari, as they were known. Haile Selassie on the cover there. Haile Selassie. At this time, many of the musicians in Kingston's music scene were already Rastafarian. It was not politically safe, socially safe to actually come out and identify yourself as Rastafarian, but these themes crept into the music inexorably. One of the Rastas was Don Drummond, founding member of the Scatolites. Many of those early ska tunes and even the early R&B tunes that came before that in Jamaica's music all had Rastafarian themes, but they had to kind of code it in a basically biblical metaphor sense. So you had a song like Cornerstone, instrumental song, nothing really to link it to Rastafari, except it goes back to the biblical prophecy of the stone that the builder refused shall become the head cornerstone, and that any Rastafarian would pick up on that reference, but would probably pass by anyone else's notice. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Rastafari grew in influence, many thousands of followers in Jamaica, or at least sympathizers. In 1966, Haile Selassie himself, his plane set down in Jamaica for a state visit. There was thousands of Rastafaris descended on the airplane tarmac to greet him. It was chaos, pandemonium, everyone thronging to get a glimpse of the emperor, who they revered as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And in fact, the Rastafari see him as God made flesh and walking the earth as a living man. That was part of their philosophy. One of the members of the crowd was Rita Marley, who told her husband about seeing His Majesty in person. He was in the U.S. at that time, I believe. She eventually convinced him to investigate Rastafari even more fully. He would eventually respond with a song called Selassie is the Chapel, based on the Elvis Presley song Crying in the Chapel. That husband, of course, was a struggling singer-songwriter named Robert Nesta Marley, who would carry the message of reggae to the world as the undisputed king of reggae, fulfilling that prophecy of John Golding. But after the state visit of Haile Selassie, there was no containing Rastafari any longer. The numbers thronged. References exploded in Jamaica's popular music. By the late 1960s, you had an artist like Burning Spear coming out with songs like Ethiopians Live It Out, Door Peep Shall Not Enter, deeply dread, deeply spiritual, deeply Rastafarian, and promoting the philosophies of Marcus Garvey through his iconic album of the same name. You had artists like Vivian Jackson, Yabi You, coming out with Conquering Lion, one of Haile Selassie's titles. All these songs celebrating and paying homage to the emperor. And perhaps most importantly, you had the Abyssinians come out with their song Sata Masagana, which was based on the Ethiopian language Amharic. So all these groups looking to Ethiopia for leadership, spiritual leadership. The Abyssinians, Sata Masagana, has been called the national anthem of reggae, covered and done over, versioned many, many times. The Abyssinians, deeply Rastafarian group. It's a Heartbeat reissue from several years ago, 2006, double LP. By the early 1970s, Rastafari would explode in reggae, and an album like Gru Nation by Count Ossie and the Mystic Revelation of Rastafari could appear, which was basically a attempt to recreate in the studio the vibes of the Nyabingi sessions. I have that LP, but I forgot to bring it. Silly me. Also, in the late 1950s, while the Rastafari were in their period of being feared, persecuted. A young white upper-class Jamaican named Chris Blackwell had run into trouble on the coast of Jamaica, ran aground in his boat in the scorching heat, was close to death, when he was rescued by a group of Rasta fishermen who tended to his wounds, kept him alive, and he vowed to promote the music of Jamaica, the real music of Jamaica, of the people, to the world. He would eventually found Island Records, eventually traveled to the UK to establish it there through the 1960s. In the late 1960s, he started promoting rock music and got the idea to merge both of them, to go back to his reggae roots and also promote it to the larger audience, a larger rock audience. And to do that, he found that struggling singer-songwriter, Robert Nesta Marley. Together, they formed Catch a Fire, recorded the Catch a Fire LP, which launched Bob Marley and the Wailers to international stardom and promoted reggae and Rastafari to the world. So that is a little history of reggae and Rastafari's role within it. Through the 1970s, Rastafarian themes exploded, dreadlocks sprouted on it. Seemingly most artists could not stay relevant without acknowledging those themes in some respect. So reggae, Rasta, and roots music have all been interrelated to some extent. Reggae has had that spiritual connection with Rastafari, which has given it a higher purpose of social commentary, of a spiritual yearning, of a political yearning, and economic yearning to be free and delivered from bondage. And that is a core part of reggae's message. I'm going to leave you with a tune by the obscure DJ Ja Ruby, very beat up looking copy here. Dread Affairs, indeed affairs were dread in Jamaica in the 1970s. This is on the Afrique label, Barry Biggs production. If a viewer keeps asking me for a spotlight on Barry Biggs, I forgot he was connected with this label. This is a song called Kunta Kinte the Dread, looking toward African roots and the roots of reggae. Long time them a fight Natty Dread. Them call the Rasta man the Black Heart man. And the people scorn him. Get a fight from the wicked man. You cannot stop him. How are you going to stop him? Peace, everybody.